Okay. Welcome, everyone. Let's get started. So we've had a lot of really heavy questions lately. I am happy to announce that today we are going to talk about something a little bit easier to digest. But with this class, we are going to need a little bit of audience participation more so than usual. So hopefully you're ready to chime in. I'm not as worried about this group, but my nighttime group, they're all kind of sleepy and just want to listen to me talk at them, but I'm going to make them work tonight. So today's question is, how do I respond to a God question when I don't know the answer? And there are lots of different possibilities here, lots of different ways to approach this question. But as usual, I want to start with some assumptions because this question has a lot of assumptions, and I'm sure that we bring a lot of assumptions with us, and we all have experience with this. So I want to spend a little bit of time on that first. So I think the first thing that the question itself assumes is that there will be questions we can't answer, which I think is appropriate. I know I can't answer every question. I don't know everything about everything, especially when it comes to God and questions that are kind of beyond my pay grade. So I think that's a good place to start, that with that humility, that knowledge that, we don't know it all, we can't answer it all. And we just have to figure out, how are we going to respond to that? The second thing that the question assumes is that we do need to respond somehow. If someone asks us a question about God, we can't just ignore the question. Depending on the context, and we're going to talk a lot more about this in a little bit, but depending on the context, sometimes I don't know isn't enough. Sometimes I don't know is cruel and callous and a refusal to engage in a relationship with someone. And so we need to have a toolbox available for us to respond in those situations where I don't know or ask someone else just doesn't cut it. And so I think the final assumption that maybe the question itself doesn't bring, but I kind of come to this conclusion based on those other assumptions, is that we need to have some basics. We need to have a foundation to fall back on. Even if those basics, even if that foundation doesn't provide a satisfying answer every time, we need something that we can fall back on to base our response on. And I'm specifically using the word response rather than answer, because a lot of times God questions don't have answers, but we can respond. We can be in conversation with someone about those topics and their questions. So we have to be aware of the difference there, that answers are, for situations where everything is clear. 2 + 2. What is 2 + 2? Well, the answer is 4. But when we're talking about asking questions about God, very rarely is there an answer per se. Usually it's a response, an invitation to be in engagement and conversation. So I want to start out today by asking you to be a little bit vulnerable, maybe with us, and think a little bit about, when was a time that you were asked a question about God or religion or church or something related to that, and you fell short. You didn't have the right answer, or you didn't have any answer at all. Or you did give some kind of answer, but you feel like you did not a great job. Can anyone think of anything like that they'd be willing to share?
Well, there was that day at the grocery store.
Can you remind us of that?
I was checking out, and the gal, the clerk, asked if I was a Christian. And, I just did not know what kind of a Christian she meant. I did not know where the question was coming from. And you're on your way out. You've just gotten your change. It's just not the time for a big discussion, it seemed to me. So that was really uncomfortable. I still remember how uncomfortable I felt.
Yeah. So what did you do?
There's so many. Yeah. there are so many times when I haven't known the answers. I can't think of one in particular, except with my brother-in-law that I argue with all the time. I can always think of something for him. I don't know.
How about you, Jim?
I was going to bring it up. I was just waiting for her to finish. I was instructed to say, okay, when you meet God in heaven, you can ask him why.
That's a good.
Which to me was not an appropriate answer. Something more than that should have been said at the time. It's like in the Lord's Prayer, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Okay.
Mm.
And if we're questioning God's actions, that my mother should die or my relative should pass on, that there is a reason for it. All right. We don't know what the reason is, but we have to put our faith and trust in God and move on from there, accept his will. Right now you're questioning his will. You have to really believe, Lord our God, Jesus Christ, that you should accept what's being done.
Hmm. Well, we're definitely going to talk about that and get to that kind of response today, Jim. So thanks for bringing that up.
Okay.
So I have a little scenario that I wanted to share with you about a time when I fell short. It was fairly recently. I was here in the office and there wasn't really anybody else around. And typically if I'm here and the only other person that's here is Pastor Bob, when the doorbell rings, I'll go and answer the door because he's often on the phone or something, or doesn't hear it. He's not very perceptive. I can say that because he's my husband. So I run out there and I answer the door. And on this particular day, the person that was at the door was a stranger, a young woman. And she asked if she could come in and talk to somebody. And I said, sure, come on in. And so she came in and sat down in the lobby there, or not even the lobby, just the little entryway into the office area. And she explained to me that she has been experiencing homelessness for about 2 years. And she'd been kind of couch surfing and staying with friends and things like that for the most part. But that she had heard through the grapevine of her homeless network that there was a house that had been abandoned. The former occupant of the home was an elderly woman and she had died. And ever since then, her family had not claimed the house. And so it was just sitting there empty. And some people, some of her friends or colleagues in the homeless world had gained access to this house. And so some of them were kind of in and out trying to figure out what they could do with it. And she wanted to know from somebody in a church whether God would be okay with her going and taking up her residence in this home. She said, the front lawn is overgrown and I'm afraid that now that these people are inside this house, they're going to trash it and it's going to become a place where people are taking drugs and leaving their paraphernalia. And, it's going to get all trashed up. And I would like to prevent that. And she told me that in California, there is a law, and I don't know all the details of it, but it's if you are squatting in a particular place for so long, so many years, and you can prove to the court that you are caring for it and maintaining it to a degree that it would not otherwise be maintained and cared for without your presence, after a certain amount of time, you can appeal to the court for ownership of that residence. And then whoever has a legal claim to it can try to argue against you. But apparently in some cases, it will be passed on after a certain amount of time to the squatter. And so she said, I want this house. I want to live there. I want to have a home. She has a dog that has special needs, and care problems. And so she says it's really hard, to be on the street with this dog that needs this extra care. And she wants to do this. She wants to take care of this house. She wants to fix it up and make the lawn look nice and the interior, function properly. But she feels guilty because she knows that the family of this deceased woman live in the area and just have not claimed this property, have not done anything with this property. And so is it wrong for her to do this, to take advantage of this law that exists? And that was her question. She wanted to know if God would be okay with her doing this. And I had no idea what to say to this person. She walks in off the street. She's asking me these questions about things I've never thought about before. I didn't even know there was such a law in place. I don't know if that is true or not. But she wanted to know, if this is something that she does, will God be okay with it? And so what I ended up telling her was, I think that if you have the capacity to do so, it might be, the right thing to do to approach the family, since you know who they are, where they are, and talk to them about this situation. But that God gives us resources in the world and wants them to be used and not squandered and not misused and not abused. And so if there's a house sitting empty and there is a person who doesn't have a home, and there is a way for that person to be connected to that home and have a place that's safe and secure and healthy, then I think that God would support that, would smile on that. So that's what I told this woman, and that mostly seemed to satisfy her. And so she thanked me for my advice and went on her way, and I've never seen her again. So I have no idea what she decided to do or, how all of that worked out. But that was an example, a great example of a time that, I got asked a God question in a particular situation, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. And I think in a lot of ways I fell short there, but I hope that, my answer leaned, if I erred anywhere, I erred on the side of grace and love and supporting her in where she was, because I'd rather that than to err on the side of being too harsh and legalistic and that kind of thing. Maybe the family would think differently about my interpretation and what I said if they had heard me, but that was where I decided to go in that moment with that woman.
Well, the squatting laws are not clear cut. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do. My husband used to manage the properties for Sierra Pacific, and they had squatters that would come on their property all the time, and they have the legal right to evict them.
Mm-hmm.
The time period that you have to squat is a long time. I think your advice was really good, that she should contact the people and see. They might have let her live there if she was going to take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that would be what God would want, I think. I think God would want somebody to take care of that house. But she's going about it the wrong way, I think, if she thinks she can squat there and take it over. It's not that easy.
Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it was a really complicated question about, legal stuff that I didn't know anything about. But what she wanted from me was not, legal advice. Right. She wanted theological advice. And so
be okay with it. Well, that's why I think your answer was really good.
So I don't know. I mean, I'll never find out what happened with that. I don't know who she is or where she was talking about or anything, but that was, that's something that's kind of stuck in my mind as an interesting encounter that I had when it comes to trying to answer these types of questions.
But that brings up another issue about this, is that people assume if you're a Christian, you do know all the answers.
Mm-hmm.
They just assume you do. Well, why don't you know? a study like ours that we're doing right now, where we have all these questions that can't really be answered,
Mhm.
that they don't understand that God doesn't reveal everything to us all at once, I guess is what I mean. But I don't think people understand that. And I feel that burden that when people ask me things, are they wanting my opinion or are they wanting facts? They want me to recite scripture. What exactly do they want from me?
Yeah, and we'll get to some of that contextual stuff here in a couple minutes. I didn't do anything with this in particular for this lesson, although it could have been helpful. I didn't think about it. But you're right in that, especially American Christianity, as as science has developed, and as a as a science, as a kind of structured understanding of the world, the way that we engage religion has really shifted. There was a time when the stories and the tensions between different ideas that might even be contradictory and those types of things were not a problem for people. That was just how life was, right? It was just everything related to philosophy is something that you kind of have to hold lightly because it's not tangible, it's not factual. And so that was just kind of how people assumed it worked. But as hard sciences have developed, and we have established these theories that are more or less accepted as fact in within science fields, Christianity, and especially in America, has really shifted and become more about that. And that's the kind of church that I grew up in, that when you went to Sunday school, you weren't there to necessarily grow your relationship with God or your spirituality. You were there to drill. You were there to fill your head with all the facts you needed so that you could answer any question, and not respond, answer, because there was an answer. And that you have to learn the right answer so that you can give that answer to anyone that asks you.
Yeah.
And that's a common assumption among all Americans, that's what Christianity is about. It's about, a Christian education is about. It's about, just like we go to school and we drill on our math facts, we go to Christian school and we drill on our God facts, and you just memorize
That's not
them
my
and you move on.
experience at all.
Yeah.
That was just not my experience. And so I've grown up thinking no one has the answers.
Mm-hmm.
All you can do is consider and discuss and ruminate and try to figure it out.
Yeah.
But no one has the answers.
So that's
had a
where I
really
am
good
now.
experience. Yeah.
But that it took people asking me the right questions to realize that I can't answer that question. I don't want to answer that question. And the value in asking the question is not in giving the answer or getting the answer. The value is in the conversation and the relationship that develops as you pursue potential responses together.
The meaning is asking the question.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're very different philosophical understandings of even what the foundational, basics of what Christianity is. And so that's why I bring up, there are some basic foundations we need in our toolbox. When somebody asks us a question about God, are we assuming that what we need to do is answer the question, regardless of whether we have the facts to answer it or not? Or are we assuming that the way that we engage is to help the person to respond or to give some kind of response? What is it that's happening in the situation? And then also what are the assumptions that the person is bringing with them to the question? Are they looking for, like you said, Karen, are they looking for the facts? Are they looking for your opinion? Are they looking for you to cite scripture at them? Are they looking for you to comfort them? There are lots of different ways that people bring their questions to you. And so all of that is part of this conversation. And that's really important to keep in mind as we explore this.
So what's a good way to find out what their assumptions are?
Well, we'll get to that.
Okay.
But I want to start with looking a little bit at the Bible and talking about human limitations, because we have evidence in the Bible that our faith, our perspectives, our human abilities shape the way that we engage God and we experience God, and that can help us to kind of start to unravel some of that. So I want to start with Matthew chapter 9. This is a story about Jesus healing two blind people. And I want you to notice what he says to them. It's really interesting. As Jesus went on from there somewhere, I don't remember where, two blind men followed him, crying loudly, "Have mercy on us, Son of David." When he entered the house, the blind men came to him, and Jesus said to them, "Do you believe that I am able to do this?" They said to him, "Yes, Lord." Then he touched their eyes and said, "According to your faith, let it be done to you." And their eyes were opened. So a lot of times this passage is interpreted as kind of a what's the word I'm looking for? A validation of their faith, that all we have to do is have enough faith and Jesus will do the things for us that we ask, because we believe that it can be done. So if you are blind or you have some kind of illness or what have you, and you ask God to heal you, it's not that God won't, it's not that God can't, it's that it's your fault. You don't have enough faith. But I ran into a really interesting interpretation of this passage this week when I was doing my research on this that I had never really thought about before. This person said that we know that God is limitless. God can do anything, but our human imagination is limited. And so what Jesus is saying here is not, you have reached the level of faith that is necessary for me to be able to help you with this, and therefore I will do it. What Jesus is actually saying is, your imagination has limited what I'm going to do for you. You're only asking me to heal your eyes. That's easy. In other places he talks about that. That's easy. But what about forgiveness of sins? What about transforming your life and giving it meaning beyond yourself? What about opening your eyes to the ways that you can engage the world and make a difference in the lives of other people? You didn't ask me for that. You could have asked me for anything. And you asked me for something so small as to restore your physical sight. And so that's what I'm going to give you. It kind of turns the whole story on its head. And I think that's so interesting, that it's about God's limitlessness, but our limitations, our limited imagination, our limited sight, so to speak. And it reminds me of the conversation that we had several weeks ago when we were talking about the Jewish interpretation of the Torah, of the early parts of why were humans created, so that they could co-create with God. Human life, human relationships is about imagination. It's about using our creativity and the skills and abilities that God has given us to fix problems, to solve issues, to make things better for everyone, along with God, co-creators with God. And so if we kind of impose that on top of this story, then we can say that what Jesus is saying here is, gosh, how unimaginative are you? Well, I guess if this is all you want, here you go. So what do y'all think about that? I was really taken by that interpretation.
Well, that's true in so many parts of our lives, that it would seem like it would not be untrue here. There are very few people that really dream wildly and accomplish what they dream. So we do settle.
Yeah. One of my favorite questions, I haven't interviewed for anything in a while, but one of my favorite questions when I am being interviewed for a position at a church is, and when they ask me what questions I have, is I ask the group of people who are interviewing me, if you had unlimited resources, unlimited money, unlimited space, unlimited people, whatever you need, to do whatever you want as a church, what would you do? And I love this question because I have never gotten an answer that was something that was actually outside the bounds of possibility. Nobody has ever said to me, well, I would rent 100 helicopters and I would fly around throwing money out the window of the helicopter in impoverished areas of the world. They all say things like, well, I would start an after school program to, help the neighborhood kids who don't have anybody to watch them after school, to give them a place to be and play and help with their homework and, not have them be by themselves after school. That is completely doable. There's no reason why you couldn't do that tomorrow if you really wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And so that I love that question because it really helps me to see, what is the vision of this place? What is the creative imagination of this place? Where are the hearts of these people without having them have the limitations that they think that they have? So you're right, Pam. I think that's very true.
So
That's a good
teacher,
point. Go
what's
ahead,
the
Jim.
answer to your question?
Oh, you want to answer my question?
No, you have to answer the question. You're the teacher.
What would I do if I had unlimited resources?
Yeah.
That's not fair. That's my question to ask everybody else. I don't have to
I'm
answer
gonna
it.
turn it around on you just like you did to us.
Gosh, I mean, the helicopters thing doesn't sound terrible, although, that doesn't exactly solve long-term problems. Maybe I would start with the helicopters and food in places where people are hungry. I would definitely do some things about climate change and helping to avoid all these fires and tsunamis and all this type of stuff. I would help to move people who live in coastal areas where the rising waters are, taking away their homeland and they can't afford to relocate anywhere. I would have all kinds of things that I would do.
And we could end borders. And that would help everybody.
Are you a Marvel Cinematic Universe person, Pam?
No.
There is a whole series called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier that is on Disney Plus right now. That is about the political aftermath of so in one of the movies, this bad guy snaps his fingers and half of the population of the earth disappears all at once. They're just gone. And so the political and economic turmoil of that, because there aren't enough workers, aren't enough people to live everywhere, they ended up working it out. They basically got rid of all the borders so that people could go, and if they were impoverished, they could go to a place where there were empty houses and live in those houses and fill those positions in factories and offices and all of this. And then the good guys snapped their fingers 5 years later and all those people came back. And so the people who had been living with no borders for 5 years and enjoying that now were expected to go back to where they came from, back to the poverty, but there were no resources to help them. And so they were all basically refugees in their own countries because of what had happened. And it's a really interesting take on that whole thing. So anyway, that's a total aside. Are you muted, Pam? Are you trying to talk to us? Yeah.
Okay, so what's the name of that?
It's called The Falcon and the Winter Soldier.
Again, the movie. Falcon and Winter Soldier?
Yeah.
Okay. Might be a good thing to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Thanks.
There's some background stuff that you might want to look into first with some of the other movies so that you kind of know what's happening, or I can tell you about what you need to know later if you want.
Okay, it's a deal.
All right, so getting back on track here after our little tangent. Where were we? We were talking about human limitations and our lack of imagination. So that's one thing that the Bible tells us about. A second place that I want us to take a look at is 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the famous love passage. Love is patient, love is kind. But this is the end of that section. It says, for now we see in a mirror dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, Then I will know fully, even as I have been fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. So I always had trouble with this passage when I was a kid, because mirrors are perfectly fine, right? You look in a mirror and it's not dim, it's not, hard to see, because we've got modern technologies. And so when I was looking at this, I wondered, what is he talking about here? What is Paul getting at? And so I did a little bit of background on mirrors, and I have to bear with me because this seems like a little bit of a tangent too, but I promise it's not. So I found these images. The one that is horizontal is a picture of a group of people who did a science experiment, and they silvered the inside of a glass flask so that it would become a mirror. So you can see that it's a ball, it's rounded, and so it kind of obscures the clarity of the image and distorts it a little bit. But you can see that it's fairly clear. You can see what's happening in the room. You can see that there's a fireplace with a picture over it. You can see there's a guy in a white lab coat. You can see there's a guy with a camera, and a few other people hanging around, but it's kind of distorted a little bit. And the reason I pulled this picture out is because during the period that Paul was living, silver was the most commonly used material for making mirrors. They would use, for rich people, they would use the purest possible silver so that the image was as clear as possible, and it wouldn't be rounded like this. It would be flat so that the image would be a little bit more more clear and wouldn't have those distortions. But that is what modern technology is able to do with silvering, to have the right combination of elements and have the chemical reaction necessary for doing that. The other picture is from ancient Egypt, so it's a little bit older than the period that we're talking about with Paul, but this is one of the earliest mirrors that we have access to in archaeological record, and it's a hand mirror. You can see that there's a golden handle, and attached to it is this plate that is polished and polished and polished so that you can sort of see yourself in it. So somebody took a picture of himself. You can see he's got his cell phone in his hand that he used to take the picture. But that's as good as it got in terms of how you were able to see yourself. And in the ancient Egyptian period, this would have belonged to someone of vast wealth. By the time of the Roman Empire, in the period that we're talking about with Paul, things are starting to change a little bit, but it's still the case that only rich people have access to really nice mirrors. So I found a quote from Seneca, who was a writer, Seneca the Younger, and he said, "For a single one of these mirrors of chiseled silver or gold inlaid with gems, women are capable of spending an amount equal to the dowry the state once offered to poor generals' daughters." So what he's saying is, it's a lot of money. It's not a ton of money, but it's a lot of money to get one of these nice mirrors. And by this point, you did have access, if you were rich, to what we would consider today to be a larger mirror where you could see your whole face, maybe even your whole body. But the average person at this time started to actually have access to getting mirrors too. They were made of increasingly impure silver, so there were a lot of spots and impurities in the image, but they were cheap enough that even, according to Seneca, maidservants were able to get their hands on their own small hand mirrors that would have been similar in size to the little compacts that you have today, that you open it up and it's got the little mirror in it, and then it has the makeup on the other side. It would be about that size, but it would be a really bad quality. You could sort of see yourself. It probably would have looked similar to this Egyptian one in terms of the quality of being able to see yourself. So inferior quality to affect the image that you could see. So when Paul says, now I see in a mirror dimly, this is what he's talking about. He's not talking about how a mirror, doesn't reflect your heart, or a mirror only shows you what's physical or anything like that. He's talking about how our human limitations allow us to only kind of see a vague outline of the truth of what is happening in the world and who God is and how God is acting in the world. You can sort of see your hair, you can sort of see your face, enough to, make sure that you don't have any flyaways, or, your makeup isn't smeared all over the place, but it's not enough to see with clarity what is happening on your face. It's not enough to see with clarity the way that God sees the world. And
You can't
so
see your wrinkles.
that's true. Those are good. That's a good part of it. But to be clear, to see yourself, or to see the world as it truly is, with all of its wrinkles, but all of its beauty, is something that is beyond our capacity as humans, is what Paul is saying here. And so when we're thinking about, answering questions or addressing issues in the world, that perspective that, there is always an answer, you just have to know what it is proven false, because the Bible itself tells us that we don't have that capacity, and we shouldn't have that capacity. I wouldn't want it, given who I am. And so one last Bible passage for us to take a look at today. I call this section, it's still within the human limitations, but I wanted to use this phrase, we know, but hey. There's a story about little kids, and it's the point of it is, that children don't really have very much upper body strength. And so if they want to, fight off a bad guy, they should use their feet. And it's, hey, we know that's true, but hey, that's rude. So here's our passage from Job chapter 38. And this is God speaking directly to Job. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy? Who are you to question me? God is saying to Job. But for the rest of us too, who are we to think that we know it all? Who are we to think that we are able to question God, or to speak for God in situations when people are asking us questions? So I thought that one was helpful for to fill into our conversation. So any comments on any of that before we move on to the next section? We're good? All right. So now I want to get around finally to what I've been alluding to this whole time, which is that context matters. There are lots of different types of questions that you might get. And depending on the context, that you could hear the same question and it could be a different kind of question. There are times when questions are going to be esoteric or philosophical, just kind of a conversational type of thing. There are going to be other times when people are asking questions amid their suffering. They are hurting and they want to know why. They want to know what God has to do with this, and why God is allowing this to happen. Kind of similarly, but I think a little different, there are going to be moments of spiritual struggle, when we're wrestling with that framework, like I did with, kind of that transition from thinking I had all the answers, or thinking I needed to have all the answers, to understanding that the answers aren't even the point. When I asked questions within that space, I wasn't really suffering necessarily, but I was still wrestling. And that is a different kind of thing than just a general question for the sake of questions and debate and conversation and mutual edification. So these are some of the types of questions that we might get. And sometimes the question itself is exactly the same, but the context in which it is asked is different. So here are some examples of questions that might have different meanings depending on the context. Is Hitler in heaven? if we in this class decided that this was a question that we wanted to address, which we kind of have talked about before, in my opinion of it, but if we wanted to talk about this question, then I would assume that it's a philosophical question. What's behind the question is about, who is God, and what is God? How far does God's grace extend? And is there something that we have to do to earn our way into heaven, even if it's even if it's at the very last moment? Or is there something that we can do on earth that is so bad that would exclude us from God's grace and forgiveness? All of those questions are kind of behind that question within that context. But, and I know that this is not historically accurate because it didn't happen this way, but if you're sitting in a concentration camp in Nazi Germany in 1944, and Hitler is dead, or you maybe will Hitler go to heaven would be a slight modification of this. That is not the context. That is not the question. The question is not about that. The question is about the suffering that we are currently experiencing and our relationship to the oppressor. And so how those questions are answered must be, hopefully, very different and look very different. And so that context really matters. Kind of similar question. Why does suffering happen? If we're sitting around, everybody's healthy, just, generally speaking, we're all doing well emotionally and mentally, and we have a conversation about suffering, it's more philosophical. It's about understanding kind of the general concept of suffering, and we can talk about all kinds of theodicy questions and answers and things like that, and theories. But when someone is distraught over the loss of someone that they love, or has gotten some kind of terrible diagnosis, all these types of things, when somebody asks that question in that context, they don't want to hear about theodicy theories. They don't want to hear about philosophy. They want to know, why is this happening to me right now? And how can God let this happen? And so the way that we address that in those two contexts is very different. And then finally, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? Different contexts. This question was really popular in the Middle Ages. And they were serious. They wanted to know the answer to this question because it was valid to them. It was an important element of their faith and trying to understand the world. And as the science of science again started to develop in its early stages, these types of mechanical questions about spirituality were important to them. But nowadays we ask a question like that and it's very tongue-in-cheek. We don't really care to know the answer to that question. And so again, it becomes more of that philosophical conversation, or even, not even to answer the question itself, but just to, talk about the possibilities out there about, how the meta world works, and, metaphysical existence and all those types of things that might come up. And so the context of a question is really important. So how do we answer questions from within a particular context, and how do we figure out what that context is? Well, I think we need to start with the types of answers that are not going to be helpful regardless of the context. So ask God. This is what Jim was bringing up earlier. Depending on the situation, it wouldn't be overtly harmful if someone came to you and said, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin? And you said, I don't know, ask God when you get there. That would be dismissive. It would be a little bit condescending, but it wouldn't necessarily be harmful, other than the fact that you're kind of losing an opportunity to connect with someone who wants to connect with you and build a relationship. But, if somebody comes up to you and says, gosh, I just got diagnosed with cancer and it's a really bad, prognosis and I might not make it. What do you think? Did God cause this? And you say, gosh, I don't know. I guess you'll just have to ask God when you get to heaven. That is incredibly rude.
Yeah.
incredibly dismissive, not helpful in any way, shape, or form. I would not recommend that answer in that particular context, definitely. Other possible answers. Ask the pastor. Sometimes maybe, if it's one of those kind of philosophical things, or you're in a relationship together and debating this question and you'd like to get another opinion, sure, bring the pastor into the mix. But again, when somebody asks you a question, they are exposing themselves. They're being vulnerable regardless of the context in which they're asking the question. And so I think that we as Christians have a duty to honor that vulnerability and not to be dismissive, and do our best to be vulnerable back and to engage with that person, whether we know the answer or have an answer or have any kind of response or not. I think it's good to go at it with humility, and you can say, I don't know, or I've never thought about that before. Maybe we could go together and have a conversation with our pastor about this and see what resources we might be able to access to find the answer to that question. But that's very different than, I don't know, why don't you go ask the pastor? That is rejecting relationship. That is rejecting that person in their moment of vulnerability, even if it's a small amount of vulnerability because of the context and the particular question they're asking. And then we've also got pat answers, the situations where someone's lost a loved one or something terrible has happened. God needed another angel. Oh, my heart, please never say that to someone. It's God's will. Well, but why? Why is it God's will? How does that fit into the God that I know, that is loving and gracious and cares for me and wants what's best for me? If God has control over the whole universe and loves me, then why is this happening to me? I think that is a legitimate question. And to say, well, it's God's will and you just have to suck it up and accept it because you clearly don't have enough faith. Again, that's very dismissive. That's very condescending. That it's not helpful at all. And so instead of any of these, I highly recommend, let's explore that together as a way to start the conversation, as a way to invite the person in to relationship with you over this question. Whether you've known this person for a long, long time, or they just walked up to you from the street and said, hey, can I go squat in this house? Is God okay with that? Let's explore that together. Because now you are engaging yourself. You are responding to the vulnerability that this person has shown to you with your own engagement, with your own willingness to spend time and energy and effort on helping the person find that answer. And so I think that's a really great place to start. So coming back around to, how do I respond? I think let's explore that together, but that's just the start, I think. Because we've talked about how important context is. And early in the class, Karen asked, how do I know the context? How do I figure out what's going on behind it? And so after you invite the person in and say, yes, I'd love to explore this with you, I think the next thing you want to try to do is expand the context. Try to understand what's behind the question. And so something that a lot of pastors and seminarians are trained to do when they're in seminary is respond to questions they don't know what to say to with, that's an interesting question. Can you tell me more about why you were wondering this or what's behind the question? So that the person can tell you, maybe you think because somebody is, experiencing the 1-year anniversary of the loss of a loved one, that their question to you today about suffering is all about that. Your assumption is that I need to be pastoral here. I need to be caring and everything like that, because this person is around the time of year where they're a little bit more vulnerable. They're thinking about the loss of this loved one. But maybe that's not what they're thinking. Maybe they just got out of a class like this, and the topic that day was suffering, and they want to know what you think of theodicy. So if you ask them, they'll tell you, right? And sometimes they won't know. Sometimes people think that they know what they want to know, but they don't really, that's not really the question. They're looking for something else, especially when it comes to feelings and emotions. You know, sometimes people will say, gosh, I just really want to know why this happened. But really their question is, who is God? How could God allow this to happen to me? Why? What is my relationship with God? And why isn't it matching up with what I thought it was in terms of what I see and experience versus who I thought I was and who I thought God was? So it might take a little bit of conversation to get to the point where you actually know what the question is, what the real question is, to help the person to unravel that. But again, your willingness to be engaged in that conversation, to spend time and energy on this person, shows that person that they are of value, that their question is of value, regardless of where it's coming from. And so even if you don't have any answers or don't have a way to respond to the question, just your willingness to engage alone might be enough. And especially in situations where we don't have the answers, like about suffering. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. The second thing that I would encourage you to do is rely on your theological rocks. And this is for those of you who did the Faith is a Verb class with us like a year ago or more. In this Zoom study, we talked about theological rocks. Theological rocks are kind of the foundational statements, the foundational elements of your faith. If you have a bucket in which you have to fit all of your theological beliefs, and you don't start with the boulders, with the big items that are really important, and you start filling it with all the little stuff, like, well, what do I think about gay marriage? Or what do I think about divorce? And all these different little things, and put those in there first, then the big boulders, like God is love, or Jesus is Lord, won't fit in the bucket anymore. You have to put the boulders in first, and then you can fit some of the other things in around it. But the boulders are going to inform how you determine those other positions rather than vice versa. And so you have to rely on those theological rocks. When somebody comes to you with a question and you don't know how to respond, it's always good to respond with those theological boulders, the big ones. Well, should you squat in this house? How God loves you. God wants you to be loved and taken care of. And God also wants you to love others. And so I have no idea what to tell you in this situation, but what I do know is that God wants you to be safe, and God wants you to have a space that is yours where you can be healthy and take care of your animal that you love and that brings so much joy to your life. And God also, wants these people who technically own this house to also have what they need. And so how can we navigate that? That's up to you at the end of the day, but that's what I have to say to you about God's position on this. That's how I, responded to that woman, by relying on my theological boulders.
Mm-hmm.
And then to kind of wrap it up, like I've been trying to do lately, I have for you Romans chapter 3, and this is a famous passage, but I think that it is often misquoted, misinterpreted, mistranslated by a lot of different translations. And so this is the New Revised Katie version of this particular passage. I tried to simplify the language a little bit so it would be a little easier. And the words, especially the prepositions that I use, are more faithful to the original Greek prepositions that are used. And I think it changes a lot with the way that we understand this passage. So I'm going to read this to you. The justice of God has been revealed through the witness of the scriptures and has been given into and onto all who believe through the faith of Jesus Christ. And so what is this telling us? Who God is can be found in the Bible, but it can also be found in us, because the faith of Jesus Christ, and faith being a verb, faith being an action, how Jesus behaved, what Jesus did, not just in dying for us, but in modeling for us how we engage with the world. That that justice of God, that witness, that understanding of who God is was revealed to us, was shown to us through Jesus and his ministry and who he was and continues to be. And so how do we answer questions? How do we respond to God questions when we don't know what to say? We fall back on Jesus. What would Jesus do? Is basically at the end of the day my answer to this question. Because that faith of Jesus, that behavior of Jesus, the way that Jesus interacted with people, what has been given to us. It is inside of us, it is on us, it has been laid into our very foundation. And so we have the capacity to respond with grace and truth and love. We just have to practice that and keep that in the forefront before we get into debates or before we start getting uncomfortable and start pulling those pat answers out of our back pocket in order to just get this uncomfortable, vulnerable situation out of the way. So that is what I have for you for today. Responses.
What if you feel like you've walked into a trap that the person's just trying to catch you up and show you to be not as great as you think you are?
Well, I think, when people ask questions in bad faith, I think that's interesting. Can you tell me more about why you're wondering this or what's behind that question? Will help to push them into an off-guard situation, because they're not coming to you with vulnerability with that question, right? They aren't looking for a relationship with you. But if you respond, even if you know that they're not, even if you respond with that vulnerability, that's gonna knock them off balance. And maybe they'll kind of buy into what you're doing. If people come to you with bad faith and you respond with bad faith, all that's going to do is continue that negative relationship. But if somebody comes to you with bad faith and you respond with earnestness and chosen naivety, I can never say that word, naivete, then that might knock them off balance just enough that they'll fall into where you're leading the conversation. And if it doesn't, you did the best you could to help the situation. And maybe next time they'll think better and not ask you that bad faith question.
I've been receiving letters since Jack passed from this lady in Shasta Lake about how she's praying for me and for everybody who has a loss. And then what it is a Jehovah's Witness, instead of going door to door, I guess they've been sending letters.
Mm-hmm.
And they're addressed to me, not just to resident or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's all kinds of quotes from scripture and everything in the letters. And it's not that they, I don't know, I just kind of don't like to be put in that position of somebody trying to push their belief on me, and I don't want to do that to anybody else. And so I try to be careful when I answer a question like that, or it's just hard to know how to respond sometimes. But I understand what you're saying, and I used to use that technique a lot in my work, but asking, well, why would you say that? And but then I got angry because I had a woman who said that she thought God had given her lung cancer because he knew she didn't want to die gasping for breath. And I lost it on her. And I know that wasn't good, but I don't know. You're not perfect. And then what you say, has a lot of weight what you say when people ask you a question like that.
Mhm.
Getting angry isn't the answer.
Usually not, although sometimes it is. Jesus got angry in certain circumstances.
I just lost it on her. Why on earth would you think that God would do that to you?
But that must have been pretty darn loving, Karen, because you were really standing up for her.
Well, yeah, but
I mean,
I
that's another way to look at it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
The only times Jesus got mad was when people were being taken advantage of and when God was being taken advantage of. You weren't mad at her. You were mad at the people that convinced her that that's who God is.
Yeah.
You were mad that her God is so small and that her sense of self-worth was so small because of whoever did that to her.
Yes, and I was supposed to be working with her. It was when I was with hospice. And I refused to go back to I refused to take her as a patient. And I'm sure, because I've never forgotten it, that weighs heavy on my heart because I let her down. I maybe could have done more to make her feel better, but
Well, we can't do it all. And sometimes those things weigh on us for years, for the rest of our lives sometimes, but that's part of the process of forgiveness too, right?
right. And you think about the fact, like you said, somebody did that to her. Somebody made her believe that. And that's what I was angry about. It's true. I wasn't angry at her,
Yeah.
but it's hard not to let your own feelings and opinions get into this situation. And I think that maybe we have to rely on God more to give us the answers, how to respond. We could ask God to give us the strength and the calmness to deal with the situation, but trusting in Him. For some reason, that's been really heavy on me this week about how we're not trusting enough that things are going to be okay. That God is in control and that God is guiding us in how we respond to questions. We're supposed to lead people to Him. So I don't know. That doesn't make sense, I don't think.
No. All good points, all good concerns. No good answers. All right. Well, next week, we're going to go back to our heavy philosophy and we're going to talk about the question, did God need a front man? So we're going to talk about some Plato and forms and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
This book I'm reading about Plato.
Yeah, maybe you can teach us the class next week. Karen.
No, I'm not that far into it, but it's really amazing to me that the way that it parallels the search for God, the problems between good and evil, and everything seemed to be leading towards Christ. And so I'm anxious to get to the part where he brings in C.S. Lewis also, because that's one of the things I most enjoyed reading was Lewis, because he started out like Paul, the atheist Paul, and then did an about face. And to me, that's really important. So who's the front man?
Well, we'll find out next week.
Say that. I knew you were going to say that.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for a good conversation today. Thanks for all your participation and not leaving me hanging to try to fill our time. And we will
Thank
be
you.
together again next week.
Okay, thanks.
See you
Have a
next
great
time.
weekend.
Bye.
Good one. We'll see you later. Charles Heston, front man.
Charlton Heston, Freddie Mercury.
See you on Sunday.
See ya.